You are about to enjoy a production of the Ella Wellness Network. This is Wellness Fixes the Pod. I'm your host, Dr. Kelsey Vick, and we are about to get hotter and smarter in 5. Let's get into it. The menstrual cycle can be so confusing. So let's get hotter and smarter in 5 as we talk about the basics. I know we've done so many podcasts diving into the specifics of the menstrual cycle, how the menstrual cycle affects your day-to-day life, your motivation, your fitness, your recovery, all of those things. But today we are just going to clarify some little bits about the menstrual cycle so that these episodes you can come back to, refresh your memory on the menstrual cycle, all the hormones involved, and that way it's just some quick knowledge that you can come back to rather than those lengthier episodes in that lengthier series on the menstrual cycle. So today we'll be talking about the uterine cycle compared to the ovarian cycle. So today, uterine cycle, next week we'll cover the ovarian cycle. And I feel like this is where some of the confusion can come from. We hear things like the follicular phase, the luteal phase, menstruation, period, ovulation, proliferation, secretory phase. We hear all of these things and we're like, okay, now which phase is all of those within the menstrual cycle? And it really comes down as to what part of our cycle we're talking about. So today we're going to cover, again, the uterine cycle. Next week we'll cover the ovarian cycle. For the uterine cycle, we have 4 phases. We have menstruation / our period. We have the proliferative phase where we're building up that lining. We have ovulation, and then we have the secretory phase where we're getting ready to shed that lining. So we'll cover all of those phases today in contrast to the ovarian cycle where we really break it down into follicular phase and the luteal phase. So for the menstrual phase / the period phase within the uterine cycle, we're talking about days 1 through 5-ish. This is when estrogen and progesterone are at their lowest. This is when we are shedding that uterine lining. Contractions are happening within our uterus in order to help shed that lining. We have a slight increase in inflammation. And again, this is a good thing because we want that inflammation in order to handle, again, I hate this word, but basically the debris. We want to help clear out that area so that that cycle can start all over again eventually and prepare for a healthy pregnancy or prepare for, again, that shedding of that liner that next month. Days 6 through 14 are what we call the proliferative phase. And again, proliferation, building up. This is when estrogen starts to rise and it's really cueing some of the building up of that endometrial lining. So it thickens, builds back up, and we can think about this because if there's implantation that's going to happen later on, we want a really healthy endometrial lining in order to support a healthy implantation and then eventually pregnancy. Ovulation occurs around day 14-ish. Again, these are all estimates, but it is when the egg is actually released from the ovaries. So that very last phase is that secretory phase, and that is day 15 to about 28-ish. And again, we're talking about the uterine cycle, which helps to clear up some of the misconceptions between follicular, luteal, all of these things. So secretory phase, we're talking about the uterus specifically. And this is where progesterone starts to dominate a little bit, which cues the termination of the building up of that uterine lining for preparation for implantation. If implantation, again, does not occur, that's when our hormones sharply decrease and the cycle starts all over again with menstruation. So menstruation / our period, proliferative phase, ovulation, secretory phase, all are the phases of the uterine cycle, the phases of the menstrual cycle, but when we're talking about the uterus specifically. So for symptomology, a lot of our symptoms as women fluctuate based on our hormonal cycles. So we dive into that, and I'll include those episodes in the show notes for the menstrual cycle series where we talk about why you might be feeling bloated, why you might be feeling on top of the world with your exercise and with your recovery. And then I'll also include one on why inflammation is actually a good thing when it comes to our menstrual cycle. Our menstrual cycle is a prime example of a good inflammatory process within our body within a controlled system. So we need that inflammation in order to help clear things out so that cycle can continue. So again, I'll link those in the show notes if you want to dive deeper into that. So if this is the first time you're learning about it, I hope it cleared up a little bit of confusion. If you want to dive in deeper, again, I'll link those episodes in the show notes below. But I also hope that those of you who already did the menstrual cycle series, the inflammation series with us, that this is a way to sort of refresh that knowledge and refresh that information And now we are all hotter and smarter in 5 after quickly learning or relearning about the menstrual cycle when it comes to the lens of our uterine phases. I'll see you guys again on the next episode of Wellness Big Sis the Pod.